Welcome to episode number 10 of the Men and Community Podcast. On this week's episode, Matt and Carlo explore the dangers and benefits of constant information. Carlo shares how we are drip-fed exactly what we want to hear. Matt gives that concept a name, and we explore how to separate the idea from the person behind it. Thank you for being part of our community.
Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to our next episode of the Mac Podcast. And it just so happens that this episode is
Episode number 10.
our 10th episode, not including our bonus episodes, of course. So it's really 10.2 and a third at this stage.
I've lost count.
Yeah, it's easy to lose count when we're in fractions and decimals at the same time. But either way, happy 10th episode. To those of you who have listened to all 10, thank you. And we're sorry. We're really, really glad that you've stuck with us. Hopefully that wherever you are and however you're listening, that you're enjoying yourselves, you're getting some value, some benefit out of spending this time with us. Today for our 10th, and as a thank you and a shout out to all of you for listening, the topic for today's episode is one that came through one of our comments that was made.
One of our very first videos and very first comments that was done by a good friend of both of ours. So we're finally getting around to talking about it, and hopefully it's everything he hoped it would be.
And if it's not, then hopefully he'll comment as if it is.
Oh, yeah.
And then we'll be good to go.
And then he'll tell us he hated it in private because he's that kind of friend.
That's true. And then he'll wrestle you to the floor and chip your tooth. But that's a story for another time.
Yeah, that's a you story.
Yeah, that's a me problem. Certainly not a you problem.
Should we get into our cards?
Let's do it. Take us away.
Okay. If you had to sleep with one of your previous teachers, who would you choose? Stop doing this.
I did nothing. I
Stop.
shuffled. You
Stop.
watched me shuffle that.
I do not recall the shuffling,
We
sir.
both answer the questions.
Oh, for the love of Pete. Obviously nobody that's watching this is probably going to know any of my past teachers. And I'm not going to say her name. She never directly taught me. But when I was in high school, we had... the entire football team was fascinated with this one teacher. And rightfully so. She was younger, just absolutely stunning of a woman. So other than that, most of my teachers were outside of my age bracket and or male. So not quite my thing. So probably her, I guess. Your turn.
You're looking at me like this question's my fault. Yeah,
everything's your fault.
In high school, I think it was my grade 10 math teacher, if I remember correctly. Very, very attractive woman, but also almost inappropriately so. I remember this one time.
Inappropriately attractive?
I remember this one time where in our class, she went up behind a buddy of mine and just kind of casually started stroking the back of his head in a way that made him real uncomfortable. So anyways, there was that, but in spite of that, I suppose, still a very attractive woman. So
sure.
That'd be the first one that came to mind. But also there was that was the math teacher. There was also multiple chemistry teachers at that school that were also very attractive at that point in time. So I guess there were options.
Okay, well, you're, as far as I know, none of your teachers are in jail, so none of those options ever actualized.
No, I mean, fantasy options, not, legitimate. On to the next card.
Yeah, good idea.
Unbelievable. When did you get into the most trouble as a teenager? Okay, most trouble as a teenager. Okay, so I was really, really independent as a kid, and I loved getting to go and do things, whether it was just getting on my bike or riding or whatever. And it's very much the same as to this day. Whenever somebody tells me that I can't do something or shouldn't do something, I usually tend to not be super thrilled. And so this one particular time, I think it was 14 or something, maybe 13. And I just wanted to go to the rec center and just go for a swim. This was something that I did very regularly. This was not out of the ordinary. For whatever reason, my mom told me that I couldn't do it. I needed to stay at home. couldn't for the life of me tell you why, but I needed to stay home, and then her and my stepdad were leaving the house to go do something else, and I had a minor freak out, took the remote control for the TV, flung it across the wall, across the room, dented the wall of the living room, and then snuck out of the house and went to the pool anyways. And for both sneaking out after, I don't remember how I got caught, but for sneaking out and then also like throwing a fit and denting the wall, it was probably the biggest trouble that I got in as a teen specifically.
Sure. Was that in the question as a teen?
Yes.
Oh. Okay. Like, I've never really gotten into a fair amount of trouble. I am one of those people that, like, I'm a tinkerer. I like to, like, I'm good with engines. I'm good with, like, I do a lot of 3D printing. I work with my hands a lot. So I'm a tinkerer. And because of that, I very quickly developed a knowledge and a way around things like technology. And I remember one time I was on a high school wrestling tournament, and it was one that was out of town. So we went and we stayed in a hotel, and we had rented a Greyhound bus, and the TVs in the Greyhound bus weren't working. And I kind of made it a personal mission to fix them. Because what else are you going to do on the bus as you drive to Wetaskiwin? Sorry, people from Wetaskiwin. My wrestling coach didn't like that. And he just kind of didn't even bother to ask what it is that I was doing. It was just like, don't touch that. And he got so mad at me. And then I got mad at him for not taking the time to figure out whether I was just screwing with it or I was trying to fix it or whatever. And just assuming the worst of me. So we had this kind of out, and I got in a fair amount of trouble for that. Coincidentally, the same wrestling coach, several years later, I rear-ended him on the tarmac at the airport.
I hope you messed up his
TV. No. But my vehicle decided it didn't like its parking brake anymore and rear-ended his vehicle while we were both standing in a security shed. It was...
Yikes.
And he's like, oh, hi, Carlo. I'm like, ah, crap. Hi, coach.
Well done.
Yeah.
Very, very well done.
All right,
let's dive in. So once again, big shout out to our dear friend Eric, who left this comment on, I think, maybe our first episode. Yes, we love you. We're really appreciative for you for following along and for posting this comment. So, I don't have it in front of me, but the comment was something to the effect of, how does it impact, or what is the impact on people of being exposed to information and media, constantly?
Yeah, 24/7.
And, we thought that was really interesting to start talking about and addressing that. What does that look like for both us personally, but then at a community level? How does it impact community to have constant access to this 24/7 media cycle, whether it be through social media, traditional news networks, non-traditional news outlets, that sort of thing? What does that impact look like? So maybe to kick it off, let's talk a little bit about in what way you interact with media, kind of in that 24/7 sort of way, and let's go from there.
Yeah, I've never been someone that traditionally watched the news. I remember as a kid, mom and dad would watch it every now and then, or, it would come on after something that we were watching and it just kind of stayed on. But as an adult, I really grew out of TV watching. Of course, I enjoy great shows and great movies, but it takes a lot to pull me back into it. So, I haven't had cable for a decade. And, that means I don't have access to, the evening news and stuff like that. So for me, the majority of my news comes from the internet. And because I believe that the news is inherently designed to be negative, so that it pulls you in, it sells more, viewership, I've never really paid much attention to big news networks. I tend to get my news from places like Reddit. Right? So for those that aren't familiar, Reddit is just an online community that can vary all sorts of different topics. And you can sign up for specific subreddits that are specific to a topic. And what I will do is I will see someone has posted this article. I will read the headline of the article. I'll read through kind of the main tag points of it, and then I'll go into the comments of that article on Reddit. Because then you get all the different sides of the story, right? You get somebody who agrees with it, someone who disagrees with it, someone who's, impartial, somebody who's bringing in some sort of outside information that says, hey, the article forgot to mention this. And very often the mods of Reddit will come in and say, hey, this article is misleading because it doesn't mention this particular point, or this article is from a non-credible news source or something. And I still don't put a lot of weight on those kind of things because news is just news, but I do feel that my intake of news and world events has changed drastically since the beginning of COVID. I used to never really care. I was just kind of caught up in my own life and my own everything. And then I think COVID brought me more inward to try and look at all the other things. And then, that became such a two-sided argument that it made me really think unbiasedly and want to take in everybody's opinions on everything. So for me, for news, it's mostly the things that interest me, but I do try to stay up to date on a little bit of everything, but through more personal lenses. I don't want the media outlet lens. I want, the random guy in Ohio to give me his opinion, and then the random person in Toronto to give me theirs, and right.
I find these conversations so interesting. You mentioned the big media, and of course, there's no shortage of criticism on the big media outlets because, of course, as you alluded to, they're a business and they're doing this for money, and we know that negativity draws viewership, right? You look at when these viewership spikes traditionally is when there is just horrendous things happening in the world. For me, I always try to do a little bit of both. Like I kind of follow the major news outlets for some of the bigger headlines, and typically some of the closer to home headlines. I find that at least on a local front, you get a better sense of what's happening kind of in my own backyard. Some of those mundane things like traffic, weather, crime, local events. I find those sorts of things are very reasonable to rely on some of the bigger news outlets. But I agree with you, especially when it comes to some more of the global international affairs. And I think for me, the way that I consumed news and media and information really started to change about 5 years ago when I was doing my master's. And a lot of what we were talking about is systems and systems thinking and just the intricacies with which all things are connected. And you realize that somebody's hungry or homeless, and all of the systems that affect them, and it's not ever as simple as feeding someone a meal or putting someone in some sort of housing, right? There's always intricate systems at play that are affecting it, and I found that really overwhelming. And actually, I remember vividly being on campus as a part of my classwork and having a full-out panic attack and not knowing what this was. And I just felt like I was just so overwhelmed by information, overwhelmed by this sense of helplessness, I guess, that went along with being weighed down by so many pieces of information all at the same time. And the classic old adage of you don't know what you don't know. And that really, the weight of that really struck me. And so when I try to consume information, it's very important for me to try to find a balance. I have to find a balance between being informed because I'm interested about world events. I'm curious and nosy at heart. I want to know things. I want to consume information, but I also am always like on this constant path of learning how much is too much and at what point I just need to turn off, disconnect, and live my life. And so I guess what I'd be curious is, what do you find when you're interacting with people? You started to allude to this a little bit. When you're interacting with people, to what level do you find constant access to information helps or hinders your ability to interact with others?
Yeah, and you and I were kind of talking about this a little bit earlier, but I think it depends on the person that you're interacting with. If you have somebody who's very worldly, somebody who pays attention to all sorts of these things, the impacts that, you know, the news and the information that is in our world have on his or her everyday life, then you can have some really in-depth conversations with those kinds of people. And especially if you can take a frame of being open to whatever they have to say without being judgmental, which is something we've talked about in other episodes, then you can have some really great conversations about how you may feel and they may feel, and, you know, get different opinions. You and I have conversations all the time where you bring a different viewpoint into it, and I go, oh, I've never considered that. And then sometimes the topic of conversation with the person is, this is how I feel. It was reaffirmed by this news outlet or this news thing that I saw, and I feel vindicated for that. So now I feel free to talk about it. Right? And you can almost instantly tell those kind of conversations when you get into them, because you can't say, but you can't say, well, have you considered this? Because the moment you do, they get confrontational. And I think that you see more of those kinds of things. And to go back to the idea of COVID, which was such a polarizing thing, in specific the vaccine mandates, there were many conversations that I had where it felt like I don't want to be part of this conversation because you are just being confrontational. You're not willing to listen to the other side. You're not willing to converse even about the opportunity of the other side of the story. You just believe what you believe. And that, of course, is not COVID specific. It's everything. It's any polarizing topic, and it's anything that people find important to them. And I think because we are now in this age of social media and curated algorithmic, I don't think I said that right, algorithm-based exposure to media, we are fed what we want to hear more than we ever have been before, right? Like your Instagram and your TikTok and your YouTube give you things that keep you on the platform. So the thing that keeps you on the platform is not the thing that you so much disagree with. It's the thing you agree with, the thing you like. Now, every now and then, I've heard it said before, if you want to be truly successful on social media, start your video with something confrontational, something negative, because then people will want to engage with you to, you know, fight their point. So you'll get mostly what you want, and then every now and then get something that you don't to drive your engagement back into the platform. So the news is not unbiased. Even if you could imagine there's an unbiased news source, unless you are willing to go digging for that, such as like me going into the comments, you're not going to find it. What you're initially going to get is what you want to hear. And I think that's created more polarization in our topics and in our conversations with people, because they're reinforced by the things that they see and the things that they're given, rather than, you know, here's the news today, and them agreeing with half of it and disagreeing with half of it. They're getting all the stuff they agree with.
Yeah, I think you bring up some really, really important points. I mean, I think that on its face, certainly having access to information at all times, it makes me better equipped, I feel, to have conversations with other people. I think that it increases the diversity of people that I feel like I can have a conversation with totally. at any sort of a given thing. It also gives me the chance to listen. I guess for me, what I've most come to learn is that when I'm exposed to information from all sorts of different ways of thinking, what it actually allows me to do is better listen with an open mind. And I don't know that that's true for everybody, but something that I certainly value now is, you mentioned those confrontational people. Well, you know, people are typically confrontational because they want to be listened to, and typically they'll still share what they think, but they'll tone themselves down if they feel like they're actually being heard. So, you know, I'm happy to sit down and listen and learn from people who believe all sorts of different things. And it's kind of an interesting way to go about it. And then you start to be able to dig in and figure out where they get their information from. And then I guess kind of the next then step or levels from that is, we get to this place where it becomes really, really, really interesting to start to unpack where people get their information. So again, to your point, we have very, very curated algorithms. So, if ever there was a question about confirmation bias, like the internet and social media has completely confirmed confirmation bias for us. And it certainly has put ourselves in more entrenched into our beliefs. And that can be really scary and really unfortunate. We talked in past episodes about how devastating that polarity can be. But kind of zooming out at more of a macro level from that, I actually find that as much as being or having access to information all the time makes me better equipped to participate in conversations with a wider range of people, I think it also challenges my ability to be present in conversations that I'm having in two ways, right? Because like we all have these devices, the little pocket computers that you talked about in your previous episode where you ran that hypothetical with your dad, but we all have access to these things, and so we've just become addicted to all of this constant stream of information. So when I'm with you for, not you specifically, but if I'm with another person for more than half an hour, it's very rare that we're not looking at our phone and still consuming other information. So ultimately, there's that distraction that takes us away from that personal interaction. But then the second piece too is that we're not as interested in diving deep to get to know another person as often, because it's very quick, because we're so impacted by information all the time. There's always something to talk about. There's always some current event. There's always something going on in the world that's going to draw the attention away from, let me get to know Carlo on a deeper level. Instead, it's, let's talk about what's happening around the world, or what's happening with the economy or politics or whatever else. And so these conversations become very, very cyclical, and it takes the place, I think, of our ability to get to know somebody else on a deeper level. We know what they believe, but we don't necessarily know them as deeply.
So what you're saying is we are more than our opinions.
I'd like to hope so.
Yeah, but we don't ever get the opportunity to expose others to that, because all we're talking about is our opinions.
Right, which is really just an evolution of the conversation we had last episode about how important it is to find a human being, right, and listen to them and get to know what their beliefs are, right? When we humanize somebody and get to know them as a person, it becomes easier to understand what they believe after, instead of identifying them based on what they believe.
Yeah. So one of the things you kind of said there was a question that I was going to ask you. Do you think that the exposure that we have to media has made you personally happier or more distracted or unhappier?
It's a very interesting question. I think it's value neutral. I think that it would be nice sometimes to be in this state of blissful ignorance. I think that would be really lovely. But I also know that I personally would never be content in a world in which I did not have access to information to develop and grow on my own. So I think that there's a little bit of a dual-sided thing. I'd love to be able to take what I know now, to be able to remove myself from society and just kind of operate a life of ignorant bliss for the rest of my life. But I also know there'd be some sort of like information deprivation that would feel like I'm starving myself of it. But I don't think that's really, I mean, short of like leaving the grid and being a hermit, attempting to reduce access to information on a whole is just not something that's feasible to be an active participant in society today. So I think that the discussion needs to be more like, how can you teach yourself to be optimistic, think positively, and then hopefully experience more positive emotions like happiness as a result thereof?
Yeah. And I think you're right, because like I said, this didn't become something that was, I didn't really pay attention to a lot of world events until more recently in my life. And I feel more involved, more engaged, more educated due to my ability to consume and bringing in all of the current event stuff. But it's exhausting to always have this new information. And lately it feels like this new challenge after new challenge after new challenge after new challenge. And you start to think about, well, the world is not in a great place and I'm not happy with a lot of these things. But I remember in March of 2020, like right as COVID was becoming this thing, I was at work and I was having a conversation with somebody about whether we were going to end up closing the office and working from home. And she was like, well, what do you think about this? And I said, well, I think I can't control it. I have no bearing on what the government says they want to do with this. So because I can't control it, I'm not going to worry about it. Right? And that doesn't mean that every time we saw the latest hospitalization figures and death figures that I didn't feel and react to them. But I realized that the only thing I could control was how I wanted to handle, the social distancing measures and, all of those kind of things. How I wanted to go about my life on a day-to-day basis in reaction to all of this news. That was the only thing that was in control for me. So I really focused in on that. I still kept up to date. I still learned and educated myself and tried to remain unbiased in as many ways as possible. But I used my morality and my beliefs to guide me to a logical conclusion that I felt was me.
Yeah.
Right? And I felt pretty good with that morality. It sat well with me. And I even remember I had kind of a big freak out because someone very close to me wasn't respecting the boundaries that the rest of my family had put in place. And I got really, really upset about it. And I got upset about it because it wasn't because the news said I should be upset about it. It wasn't because, social media had painted people that didn't follow the rules as bad people. It was because I felt it was wrong, because I was making sacrifices to protect my family, and this person felt they didn't need to make those same sacrifices, but was benefiting from the sacrifices of me and the rest of us. So it really upset me. So I think as much as it's nice to have access to this, you can't let it overcome you. You can't let it shape you. You have to use the information you gather in as unbiased of a way to form an opinion that falls within your own value and moralities. Because if you don't, you will feel like you've been programmed, quote unquote. You will feel like you've been taken advantage of, and you will feel unhappy with all of this information, right? And some people, I understand, are okay living lives of, the news says this is what we need to do. The government says this is what we need to do. And I'm not telling you to go challenge the opinions of your government. It's not what I'm saying. Whoop, whoop. But what I am saying is that there is two sides to every story. Do your own due diligence to find both sides, and then form what falls into your values for you, not what anybody tells you. And it allows you to live a little bit more of a calm and, I think, happy life with all of this crazy going on.
Do you remember how old you were the day that you realized that your parents weren't these omnipotent beings, that your parents were just human beings? Do you remember roughly how old you were when that happened?
Yeah, like 16.
I think this is a really important point, right? We get to an age where we remember that our parents are humans and that our parents aren't perfect, and they shift from a place where we do what they say because we're supposed to do what they say to this place where we know that they're humans and we respect them as humans, and so then we do what they say. Or we get to a place where they suggest things to us, and then we have the autonomy to evaluate for ourselves whether or not this is the thing we should do. But I think what's really, really valuable for us to consider when we're aware of all of the information around us, no matter where we get our information from, whether it's social media, Reddit, traditional news agencies, non-traditional news agencies, from the person yelling out the second story window down the street, wherever it is that we're consuming that information, I think it's important to remember that just like our parents, no matter where you get that information, it's not coming from this omnipotent source. It's coming from another human being, right? Every single thing that we consume is coming from another human being, and that human being is biased, that human being is imperfect, and that human being has their own sets of experiences and opinions and upbringing and backgrounds that have shaped who they are and where they sit today from behind whatever camera, microphone, or keyboard they are putting that information out into the world. And that's not to say that they're malicious or anything like that. It's just to remember that everybody is imperfect, and every person then transcends to organizations, media outlets, social media platforms, governments. All of these things have slants and skews and biases, and I think, and we've talked about this in previous episodes too, everybody is biased, and I think the most ignorant thing that somebody can claim is that they are unbiased. And so as you so rightly said, it's a really very important goal to try to consume as broad of a base of information as you can to limit our own biases, while recognizing that everything we consume, so long as there is a human being that is producing whatever we consume, there is some level of bias. And then the second piece, which kind of tags on to what you said, and so on this idea of control, which I love, I always say it's not worth worrying about the same thing twice. And when we're so in tune with what's going on or what's about to go on or what could go on, right? When we're recording today, we're about 5 weeks out from a provincial election, and so that's really dominating our local news here in Alberta. Well, if you're spending all your time worrying about what might happen before you know whether or not it's going to happen, only to then worry about it once it does happen, now you're worrying about things at least 2 times, if not more than that. And certainly when the idea of what can we do to influence our own well-being, our own happiness, certainly choosing, because it is a choice, choosing to worry about things more than we need to worry about them is a big thing that takes up time that we could be spent doing more productive things. So stuff is going to happen, stuff isn't going to happen, but until we know for a certainty what is or isn't, we have the choice to not worry about it, and then we get to not worry about it twice.
One of the things you said, just piggybacking off of me, was the idea of not of taking in this broader range of information. And I think I saw a really great example of this. It was a video that had come out, and it was a robot designed to do menial labor. And all it was doing is it was moving a box from one room or one side of the room onto a conveyor belt. And then the conveyor belt would take it back and put it back where it was, and the robot would do it again. And this robot was on display at a trade show for like manufacturing, distribution, packaging kind of thing. So this was a company saying, hey, look, we have made this next step into developing a robot that can do this menial task that no human would really want to spend their day doing. So when I first was introduced to this video, what it was the robot was doing this, and then it collapsed. It just fell to the floor, unresponsive. And the caption underneath was, robot does 15 hours of menial labor and commits suicide. And I looked at it and I said, what did this robot do that screams suicide? It collapsed. That could have been a mechanical failure, a battery failure, a programming fault. It could have been everything. So what I did is I went and I sought out the press release from the company that made the robot. And their response was, our robot made it 15 hours. This is the longest it's ever gone. We're super happy with the result, that it was displayed for everyone to see. We've come so far. We're excited for our future journey. Two completely different sides of that. Right? Like, this robot did not, in my opinion, unalive itself. It failed. A human being after 15 hours of menial labor would not feel so great. It's why we have certain labor laws that you can't work for so long. So I could have consumed that and looked at it as, oh my Lord, look at all of the terribleness that our poor, underpaid working class has to deal with, that this robot can't even do it, and that's what it was made for. Or I can look at it as, this company is developing a robot, like our conversation last week about AI, that is going to allow the humans that were doing that job to work on other things that require a human's touch. Because moving a box from one end of the room to another, I'm sorry, you may have a job that you do that and you adore it and you love it and I'm happy for you, but that was not really what the human capacity, your brain capacity was made for. Right? Like you have other abilities and skill sets that you can develop besides moving a box from one room to another. A robot can do that. Right? So think about all the people that are currently doing that in this world, that would be able to focus on other things and learn new skills. Does it mean there's going to be less jobs for people? Maybe. But hopefully it steers them in a direction to expand and grow and take advantage of other things, right? So it was just two completely different things. But if I had not gone and sought out the other side of that, it would have been only the negative.
And realistically, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, because again, there's a marketing person on the end of that press release who probably is trying to
swing it for better.
Yeah, they're trying to ensure shareholder confidence and drive a stock price and all of these other things. And so, we so often talk about two sides of a story, and what I could not feel more strongly about is there's never two sides to a story. There's a hell of a lot more than two sides.
Sure.
And I think that's something that is so often underappreciated. We often think of, and again, it feeds into that polarity piece that you were talking about. We so often think us versus them, A, B, black, white, 1, 2, yes, no. But there's so much more to that. And all of the information that we're consuming on a day-to-day basis thrives on this notion that there is right and wrong, good and bad, just, unjust. And that's where we get into so many of these confrontational arguments with people, is because we then entrench ourselves in one side or the other. And when we're constantly fed this information that confirms what we already believe, it just more deeply entrenches ourselves in those beliefs. And then we're so much less willing to budge when somebody comes to tell us something that we find abhorrent or that we don't prescribe to believe.
Sure.
So what do we do about it? What can we talk about this stuff, and what is it that you feel that somebody can do to really make sure that access to information on a consistent basis continues to be a productive or constructive thing in their lives?
Yeah, because I think there's kind of two directions that this question is going. One is I'm already consuming all of this information. I find it interesting. I'm already consuming it. How do I make sure this is something that benefits me and doesn't just drag me down? And I think the other side is, I don't already consume all of this. I want to be more informed, but as I be more informed, I want to make sure I'm doing it in a way that is beneficial. And I think pretty much the answer to both of those is do exactly what you were talking about, is understand that it is not two sides of the story. It's more like a stir fry of truth, right? It's all the different ingredients in one pot, right? And depending on who's cooking it, it can taste a little different. So try and consume information in only the areas that you find valuable, right? Just because the media and social media is talking about one specific topic doesn't mean you need to be interested in it. Try to stay focused on the topics that you find value in. And then when you find those, be willing to reach out to the other side of the argument, because you're going to immediately identify what you think you are in line with. Be willing to, look at the other news site, look at the other person's comment who's disagreeing, look at, the other side of the story, and be able to pull that in. And I think if you can do that, it's going to put you in a position to more objectively think about things. And I think more importantly, it's going to put you in a position to have discussions with people on the other side of the fence. Because we've talked about this before. If you can have an open, unbiased, unjudgmental conversation where you disconnect the person from the opinion, you have an opportunity for growth and for learning far beyond what any just regular on your own research will lead to you. Because the human element, the opinionated element, is really what gives information power. And then as you're gathering all of this information, don't let it affect you if you can't control it. Right? Is there anything about what I said that you think you would change, disagree to, add to?
I like everything you said very much. I agree with it. I would add, again, just that gentle reminder that there's always another human being on the end of anything that you consume. And just like we are, they are biased and imperfect. Yeah. And that's such a critical thing to remember. The other thing that, I'm thinking now, and again, it follows your theme of focusing on what we can control and trying to not stress about things that we're not in control of. Well, so often any sort of news or information takes advantage of this ability we have to feel like we're more invested or involved in something than we really, really are. So I think an interesting thought exercise whenever you're consuming a piece of information, like imagine yourself being picked up like you're like one of the characters on Sims or Roller Coaster Tycoon.
Sure.
The games where you could pick up the people and drop them where you wanted them to be. And ask yourself if you've actually got a role to play. Right? Like if you're actually involved in some way. And I think this is where we start to panic and stress ourselves out about global affairs or politics or things like that. Do I have a role to play? And that can go two different directions. It can either mean, do I actually have a role right now in having an impact on whatever this piece of news or information is? Or could I choose to have a role? And now these are very, very important distinctions, because if I do not have a role or I don't have any influence on that situation, then I can consume that information, parcel it away, package it up, put it in that box, ask the robot to take it to the other side of my brain, and I can leave it. If I do have a role, then I need to act on it. Then I have some control. Either way, that's a good thing. Now, then you get to the place where you can choose whether or not you have a role. Lots of people choose to have opinions and not choose to take action. I think that is an incredibly dangerous place to be, and then gives way to a lot of really inherently negative things. Or you can choose to have an opinion and choose to take action. And one of the easiest pieces of action is having a conversation, searching out diverse sources of media like you're talking about. But it's just being aware that not to worry about something if you don't have control or influence, and being really aware of your opinions and who you're sharing your opinions on certain subjects with if you're not going to make the conscious decision to actually take action on your opinions.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, it's not a clear cut thing. The world is changing. The way we consume our media is different than it has been every year from the year before it, and you know, it's it feels like there's constantly new bad every day. New things to be concerned about, new opinions, new, you know,
Thanos is gone. Now it's Kang.
There, exactly. If you're a Marvel fan, you get that reference. So
if you're not a Marvel fan, you can stop listening to our podcast now.
Oh, geez. Shots fired.
Feisty.
Yeah. So, you know, it's one of those greater things that people much smarter with more degrees than either of us would argue for days.
And they'd still be biased. So, you know, I think as with everything that we talk about, do your best to make it something that provides value to yourself and to others, right? Because that's really all you have in life is how you affect others and how they affect you, which is the premise of this podcast. Hey, that's not bad. It's episode number 10. We're kind of bringing it all around again. We're figuring ourselves out.
We're figuring it out.
Woo!
All right. I think we'll kind of bring the episode to a close now. I want to start with the thing that I'm grateful for from you. Today I had the pleasure of being in a class that you taught. And I think you've talked about it on this podcast before. Dance Play is an organization that you're a part of, which is a wonderful organization. I won't steal your thunder. You can talk about it. Maybe we'll even do an episode just dedicated to your time in it. But I got to be part of one of your classes, which is not something that happens very often. And it was a fantastic workout, and it was a great time, and it was a lot of fun, and the group was great. But there was several moments where I watched you with unrelenting just kind of love just kind of pour out into your class, where you just wanted, like, we were doing something inherently goofy, like making a heart with our hands and then like spreading it out, you know, as we're dancing in this class. And there was so much genuine emotion in the way that you were doing it. You just wanted everybody in that class to have fun and to feel loved. And it was just, I was grateful to be a part of it. I was grateful to know that we were then going to come back and take some of that energy and bring it into our podcast. So that's what I'm grateful for from you today.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm grateful for you, especially for, I'm saying this in a backwards way. Today I'm feeling especially grateful for you for always sharing your wins. And I know this is something that we've talked about a lot, but prior to recording we went for lunch because, as you heard, we worked up an appetite, and so we went for lunch, and you were sharing with me, you know, as we always do, some of the challenges but also some of the wins. You've connected with some new people. There's some exciting things on the horizon, possibly even implicating this podcast. And we won't spoil that yet, but, you know, could be coming down the line here soon. But in any case, you got to share some like exciting things with me. And when you first shared the things, I kind of had like, because look, we're both like super outgoing, super like people oriented people. And so when you first shared what you did, like the first feeling that I caught myself feeling was a little bit of jealousy. And then I had to pull back on it really, really hard. I'm like, no. This is exciting. This isn't like what I need to be feeling right now. And what I was really grateful for is for you sharing your wins, particularly because I feel like so often that the people in our lives come and pour out like negativity or challenges to us. And I will never ever let myself be in a space where I'm going to be jealous of someone else's wins, when it is a much worse feeling to have people constantly pouring out their negativity in their direction. So thank you for all of sharing your wins and your excitement with me. It like fuels me, it fills my cup, and it makes me more excited to go out and get more wins of my own.
Awesome. I have no problem telling you about how successful I am.
Good. Excellent.
And on that note, guys, we want to thank you for joining us for episode number 10 of the Men in Community podcast. This has been a wonderful journey so far. We're having a lot of fun. We've had some episodes where people have listened to lots of people have listened to it. Some people have listened to other episodes, not so much. But every one of them has been fun to record. Every conversation has been thought-provoking. And I think I can speak for both of us when I say we're going to continue doing these.
Whether you like it or not.
Yeah, it's always going to pop up in your feed. For those of you that aren't caught up, get caught up. Like, we've had some really great episodes, in my opinion, lately. Like, we want to hear your feedback on them. And, share us with a friend. Something that we say has to be profound enough or has to be good enough that it could provide some value for somebody. So please share it. Leave us a comment, a review, something, social media engagement with us. It helps grow the podcast. And that's really what we want to do, is we want to grow this to a point where it just provides more value for more people.
And if you heard anything today, please, as soon as you're done this episode, wherever you are, take a second to take out your headphones, turn off your device, maybe not turn it off, but at very least put it in your pocket, get outside and go for a 10-minute walk. Just that disconnection, that fresh air, just it makes a world of difference when we're connected to screens and technology all day. So give yourself that opportunity for that reprieve.
Love it. All right, guys. Thanks again. We'll see you in episode number 11.
Take care, everyone.